go to our next guest. We have Daniel Lazare, another good friend of the show. Daniel Lazare. Come on. How you doing this morning, Dan? You doing all right?
I'm just fine. How are you?
Excellent. I'm doing all right. Daniel Lazare is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Velvet Coup and America's Undeclared War, and many more. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me today.
My pleasure.
So Europe is in flames. And Europe is in flames. And what I mean by that is specifically Georgia. I'm fascinated by what is taking place in Georgia right now. Europe seems to take this very clear plan to try to overthrow that government in the way that they did Ukraine. The president, Salome Zurabishvili, I believe the name is pronounced. She kept saying, I'm not going anywhere. I don't care about the results of the election. She loses the election. I would imagine she knew she was going to lose that election. And the new president, Georgian Mikhail Kalashvili, I may be pronouncing that name wrong. They're doing everything in their power to overthrow that government, and even getting Europeans involved in trying to do so. I mean, for God's sake, she was born French. Many people think she was a spy for the French, or at the very least a stalking horse for Europe. Give me what's going on the ground right now. I saw this massive police presence that they brought to bear to deal with the protests, to prevent it from getting to that point of Maidan. And what's even wilder about this, right here, this clip, what's even wilder about this, it seems that the more nationalist governments in the European Union is protecting Georgia to prevent it from turning out like Ukraine. I mean, look at this police. I mean, this is a massive police presence trying to resolve their issue. The prime minister had already said this is not going to be another Maidan. Give me your take on all of this. This is fascinating. What context? How do you form this in your mind when you're thinking about these events that are taking place in Georgia right now?
Well, these protests have been going on for 18 or 20 days, night after night. It's extraordinary. And the government's under intense pressure, but it won the election quite clearly, and it's determined to stay in office. And as you said, they don't want a repeat of the Ukraine in the February of 2014, where the protesters set up a camp, and essentially were able to use that camp to sort of drive a wedge into the government and eventually overthrow it. Yeah. So there's a very heavy police presence. They're determined not to let the protesters dig in, but it's extraordinary. I mean, essentially, the EU is trying to overthrow a government, a legitimately elected government, and there's a bitter civil war erupting in the EU between. On one hand, you have Hungary and then Slovakia, which are battling this pro-US EU consensus, and it's splitting the union. But also, it's all everyone knows that in 4 weeks everything's going to change, and that is when Donald Trump comes into office. So it's kind of the storm before the storm. So everyone's expecting a real change to ensue, a fundamental reorientation in international politics. And so they're battling it out for advantage in the final weeks leading up to that change.
Certainly. I mean, I'm curious on how the European citizens see this. I mean, there seems to be an orthodoxy between the United States and Europe, especially on this issue of war, on foreign policy. And you get Orban, Fico, who seem to be bucking that trend. And in the context of bucking that trend, I guess supporting some of the nationalist governments. And I don't mean support by actively going and doing something. I just mean trying to protect them through the device of the European Union. Because Europe wants to pass sanctions. They want to do something similar. Oh, look at these peaceful protesters carrying lilies were beaten by cops, and they held on to the lily as they were being beaten by a cop. Yeah. And so we in Europe needs to come out and pass sanctions in order to crush the Georgian government. Like this is just shameless and shallow at this point in regards to what they're trying to accomplish. Do you think the government is going to be able to withstand this level of pressure that is being continuously applied to it in this way?
Yes, I do actually. I mean, it's very hard to say. I could be wrong, but my best guess is it will, because it knows that that a big change is on the way. That if they hold out for 4 or 5 more weeks, the entire international situation will shift, and it'll be a whole new ball game. So therefore, therefore I would, and that's why the opposition is pushing so hard, because they want to get all their ducks in a row before the new ball game sets in. So everyone's rushing for advantage. But I think the government could very well hold out. They seem to be very determined, and they had an election, and that's the important thing. But by the way, it's not the U.S. versus the EU versus Georgia. It's this neocon party, which essentially has been in power across the U.S., the EU, into Korea, South Korea as well, and that party is now shaking and tumbling down. And in South Korea, there was this attempted coup d'état, imposition of martial law by a pro-American prime minister that collapsed. You have Trump taking office in the U.S. You have growing disarray in the EU, and you have this battle over Georgia, a very small country but strategically very important. It's the battle is reaching the climax.
Do you think this is a change of orthodoxy in the European Union at this point, especially with losing in Ukraine? Like, meaning, do you think part of this has to do with this kind of cascade effect of you've overthrown a country, you've dragged Europe to this kind of brink of war, you're trying to expand that war, whether in Moldova or, for that matter, whether in Georgia?
Yeah.
Like, meaning, is this the turn of the worm? Is this the European public? I mean, look at Germany, for example. Germany, the government has collapsed. The French government has, for all intents and purposes, collapsed, with Macron trying to put in one of his cronies as opposed to putting in one of the party members that was, part of the coalition that won. Is this the turn of the worm? Like, is this a change of context that Europe is trying to undergo? And will this affect the relationship between Europe and the United States if indeed they go in that direction? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in the Georgian Dream Party, they've been sounding this theme about a global war party, a global war party that wants to drag Georgia into the Ukraine war. And it's very funny because Wikipedia has an entry about the global war party, and they label it a conspiracy theory. But the Wall Street Journal just last weekend had a piece by Yaroslav Trifimov, one of their top correspondents, essentially asking, has World War III already begun? So there is this global war party. It's determined to extend the Ukrainian war. It wants to drag other countries into the war, to force them to adopt hostile anti-Russian policies. And those policies, however, do not have broad support, especially in Georgia, Romania, Moldova, etc. And there are a lot of cracks in the wall. This global war party is collapsing because the war is going poorly, because the Ukraine is losing. And so therefore there's a growing dissatisfaction. The worst thing you can do in politics is lose a war. And when you lose a war, then you get your head chopped off, and either literally or figuratively. And so in this case, they have lost a war, and they are reaping they're paying the penalty for it.
What do you think this is going to mean for NATO, by chance? I mean, like, moving forward from this, because you're right, they lost the war. And in the context of that, they're doing everything in their power to, I don't know, I guess, spin it to try to hold on for as long as possible. I mean, part of me even thinks that the thought is, well, we want to let this fall on Trump's lap as opposed to falling and collapsing under Joe Biden. But that's a secondary conversation. From the standpoint of NATO, what do you think this means for NATO? Is this the death knell to the significance and importance of NATO? Or are they going to look at this and try to basically double down on either the expansion or the adding in more money and that type of thing, resources into NATO? What are your thoughts?
I think they can't double down. I think that game is at an end. I mean, under Biden, NATO is expanding, is adopting extremely hostile anti-Russian, anti-Chinese rhetoric. I mean, the rhetoric was out of control. They were establishing bases in Latin America. I mean, Colombia was somehow brought on to NATO. I don't quite understand what the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is doing, in South America. There was talk about establishing an East Asian branch of NATO. I mean, it's a coalition. It's a military coalition in search of a war, and it was just getting out of control. And I think that is clearly at an end. I think that Trump has no sympathy for those policies, and I think that NATO is going to be drawn back. By the way, I'm not pro-Trump. I mean, I think that Trump, if anything's going to usher in a period of actually increasing national conflict. I think that what we see in Syria could be a sign of things to come. I mean, you have the U.S., Turkey, Israel. I mean, all converging on that country. We don't know how, they're going to try to battle it out for control. We don't know what's going to happen. The U.S. has deep interest there. So more conflict will ensue as Turkey, the U.S., and Israel proceed to carve up Syria. And I think that we'll see more conflict ensue as well as the U.S. and other powers try to sort things out.
No, I agree with you on this. I didn't vote for Trump. Not a fan of Trump. I don't have the level of hysteria that I see among Democrats around Trump. If anything, I'm hoping that he stays with what he said on the sense of foreign policy, at the very least to end wars and not necessarily start them. But I have no idea. He's a wild card. And hubristic people can end up in certain situations because of that hubris. So agreed with you on Syria, agree with you on the chaos that may lead domestically. I guess by definition, though, if NATO goes belly up, doesn't it mean Europe is going to have to attend to their own security needs? And do you see? Yeah, please.
I don't think NATO will go belly up because if it goes belly up, then all hell breaks loose. Essentially, Europe is back where it was in 1931, 32, 33, and that was not a good place. So NATO, I don't think NATO will go up, but I think that NATO will definitely be forced to rein in its ambitions to stop this nonsense about East Asia and Latin America. And I think that Trump wants to end the war in the Ukraine, and that will clearly be at the expense of the NATO old guard, which has been deeply involved in pushing this war, and has lost. So when he says, when you lose a war, you get your head chopped off, and figuratively, or if not literally.
I'm curious from your point of view. I mean, this was always a red line for Russia. I mean, even under Boris Yeltsin, when all things being equal, Russia was, I'm not going to call him a vassal of the U.S., but definitely in a weaker position with regards to the U.S. Boris Yeltsin, Bill Clinton, even under that administration, it was still considered to be a fail and a red line. And then you get the net means net memo from William Burns, where he very clearly articulates this is going to create a civil war. It's going to be on that border. They're going to have to get involved, whether they want to or not. And yet they still kept going in that direction. I mean, do you think this was something that they saw in advance and they thought to themselves, oh, this is great. It's a Hobbes choice. They're going to either have to get involved or we have advantages if they get involved militarily and economically. And if they don't get involved, we at the very least have a platform for Ukraine where we can expand the borders of NATO. Meaning, did they sleepwalk into this? or did they plow into this knowing full well the most likely outcome in regards to the conflict?
They sleepwalked. No, the disaster that took place in 2014 was just extraordinary.
Yes.
I mean, NATO. I mean, the neocons were so aggressive and so heedless of the risks, and so unwilling to consider this in a broader perspective. I mean, this is exactly as if Mexico had entered into an alliance with Russia or China against the U.S. Do you think the U.S. would have tolerated that for one instant? Absolutely not. I mean, the F-16s would have started scrambling within seconds. It's ridiculous to even imagine that. And Russia regarded the Ukraine as an equally sensitive area. Just as U.S. has deep cultural ties to Mexico, Russia has even actually far deeper cultural ties to the Ukraine, and the U.S. the neocons were completely heedless of that risk, unwilling to consider any of the countervailing tendencies, unwilling to even consider what the broad risks were. And so it was obvious that in 2014 they backed this coup d'état, led, as even the New York Times reported at the time, led by neo-Nazi forces, and the country then splintered immediately. Essentially, the uprising in Kiev was accompanied by parallel anti-Kiev uprisings in Donetsk and Luhansk, the Crimea, and Odessa. And the country exploded in civil war. And the civil war simmered for 8 years. And then finally, after more U.S. provocations, Russia went in. Now, once again, I'm not backing Russia. I'm not saying that Russia's decision to invade was correct. I'm not saying any of that, but nonetheless, it was predictable. Right. And the miscalculation on Washington's part was massive, absolutely massive. And now they're losing. And they're paying the price.
Yeah. I guess we all are on some level, especially with this level of brinksmanship that's taking place. What's fascinating about this too is the economic and political impacts. Like, meaning this has had geopolitical ramifications that have been somewhat expansive. I mean, even from the standpoint of the European economies. Angela Merkel, in her book, in her memoir, she pointed out that the U.S. seemed to be perfectly okay with destroying or injuring the European economies, which is pretty wild considering that Europe is supposed to be, I would argue, we don't really have allies, we have vassals. But either way, we have countries that we're more closely associated with. But we don't seem to care that it's damaging Europe. I remember when this first started, and Macron goes out and says, well, hey, Joe, aren't we all in this together? And Joe Biden was like, no, we're not. Pay us. Give us the 5 times more for the energy costs that you guys are effectively paying for now. And if you look at the European economies, especially Germany, or for that matter, France, and some of these other countries, they are being decimated and being deindustrialized on some level as a direct result of policy. They try to blame Russia. So, well, Russia went to Ukraine and then our gas policy went nuts. It's like, yeah, but you guys made those choices. I mean, I guess my thought is, will they be more sane European policies, especially if Macron gets taken out of office, if the German chancellor gets taken out of office in the snap elections coming up next year? What do you expect for the direction of European policy going forward after this moment in history?
Well, I expect first of all, I expect a further drift to the right. I think Le Pen is essentially, waiting in the wings, waiting to take over. I think we'll see a further right-wing drift in Germany with a growth by the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the far right party. About energy policy, the sword of Damocles hanging over international politics is Nord Stream. I mean, this is.
By the way, they would never admit that, though. If you could read article after article, they would never bring it up.
This the way that this has been covered up by everybody is extraordinary. I mean, this is the elephant in the sitting room that no one wants to talk about. The U.S. blew up Nord Stream. That is quite clear. I mean, that should be our assumption. I mean, maybe if Tulsi Gabbard becomes director of national intelligence, she can launch an internal investigation to find out exactly what happened in September 2022. But any sober, balanced examination of the evidence leads you straight to the conclusion that it was the United States. This is not conspiracy theorizing. This is just it's a straightforward examination of the evidence. And no other theory has worked out. And the idea of the 5 Ukrainian saboteurs in a 50-foot yacht is just beyond ridiculous. So the U.S. crippled Germany's gas supply. It sabotaged it. And Germany has been hit very hard by high energy prices. Its economy has been flat for the last 3 or 4 years, and that is causing grave upset in the German population. So I think there's going to be growing disarray, growing dissatisfaction, but things are very turbulent, very turbulent. We'll see what happens when Trump comes in, but things are really in an uproar, and I think that they're not going to calm down after January 20th. If anything, they will heat up even further.
What are you expecting of Trump, by the way? Any expectations at all, whether it's foreign policy or, for that matter, domestic policy? I mean, I guess the question becomes, let's say, even if Trump is sincere about this notion that I want to end wars, not start them, do you think he's going to be able to do it? Is a president enough? Meaning, is one man, can one man effectively do it, even if he brings it? And by the way, this is even if you bring on a cabinet that is less hawkish. I mean, for God's sake, Rubio, Hegeseth, all of these people are just straight neocons. Huckabee, I forget the other one that was added onto the thing. Many of these people are just straight neocons. And yet, he also has people like RFK, Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, people who seem to be less interventionalists. I mean, usually people of policy, this is a bit muddled and conflicted. What do you think he's aiming at with this, a cabinet arranged in this sort of way? Is he looking for some kind of balance? And what are you expecting from a foreign policy sense? Is a president enough to alter the orthodoxy of U.S. foreign policy?
Look, Trump is riding high. It's remarkable. I mean, he himself said, this time in 2016, everyone hated me. Now everyone loves me. When he opened up a session of the New York Stock Exchange, the floor erupted with chants of USA, USA, USA. The business class, the capitalist class adores him. They are just, they are thrilled. It's extraordinary. I expect total chaos. I think that that Trump is an authoritarian. I wouldn't call him a fascist. I think that term is not appropriate. It's just simply technically and historically not the right term, but he is definitely an authoritarian. We'll see if he follows through in his threats to deport 11 million immigrants. If he makes any gesture in that direction, the results will be tragic. I'm talking about families torn apart, children abandoned. It's going to be just heart-rending. And the damage to democracy, to civil liberties will be extraordinary. Are we really going to have concentration camps in the United States? So far, that is what Trump seems to indicate. Now, everyone discounts Trump's rhetoric. Everyone assumes he's just sort of just sort of talking, off the top of his head. But if he is serious about this, it is going to be very dramatic. And in terms of foreign policy, Trump, things are blowing up. The Ukraine, just assassinated a Russian general. It really is doing its best to extend the war. In other words, to present the U.S. and Europe with a wider war that it really can't turn off. Putin, of course, is furious. So therefore, when he and Trump sit down to negotiate an end to this war, he's going to drive a very hard bargain and will want further concessions from the U.S. Perhaps involving Iran. We can't be sure. Certainly involving Georgia, and the question whether Trump gives in or says no, and therefore maybe the war in the Ukraine will resume if Trump and Putin wind up at loggerheads. And the situation in the Middle East is, of course, extraordinary. That region is just being devastated, and that's a big problem with Trump as well. He doesn't, he owns half of the northwestern portion of Syria, the Syria to the west of the Euphrates River. The Americans are stealing Syrian oil as we speak. They're backing the Kurds, who are enemies of Turkey. So we have elements of a major conflict there. It's just really unclear. I think that things are really in chaos, and I expect that chaos to increase.
Is it fair to say that the Kurds are screwed in the situation? That Blinken went over to have a conversation with the Turkish foreign minister's counterpart, and I have a hard time believing that Turkey, both of us, Turkey and the U.S., and for that matter, Israel, backed the terrorists in order for them to take over the country. You had multiple groups that were involved under the HTS, what they were calling HTS. But at the end of that, let's say, takeover period, you did get Turkey that seemed to be more in charge and more in control of the rebels. For God's sake, Donald Trump even came out and said, well, Turkey is effectively responsible. He absolves the U.S. of blame in this situation, but whatever. It's Trump. It's the way he talks about it. Blinken goes over to have a conversation with his counterpart. The Kurds who are on the ground, there are articles where they were begging Israel to get involved to help them because they were losing territory to the groups that are in power now in Syria. And for that matter, going through the U.S. trying to get assistance from the U.S. to hold Turkey's hand in this kind of takeover of the Syrian government. Do you really believe that they're going to avoid getting their hands on the most profitable land in Syria in this way? Meaning, I don't get the sense that Turkey, pushing the rebels in this case, are going to avoid pushing out, or at the very least attempting to push out America, and definitely crushing the Kurds, considering they have the opportunity to do so because they're effectively surrounded. You have on one side Turkey, on the other side a group that's pushed by Turkey. Give me your thoughts on this. Is it going to be a situation where the U.S. prevents it? Can the U.S. even prevent it? I know they have a few troops on the ground. Give me your thoughts on this.
It's a mess. First of all, Erdogan, the president of Turkey, he's a tough guy.
Yes, he is.
I despise him. He's terrible, but he has held on to power for years and years. His obituary has been written 1,000 times and never has come to pass. He is essentially a neo-Ottoman. He wants to extend Turkish influence into Central Asia and also into the Middle East. As you know, Syria was once part of the Ottoman Empire, and so it looks like he is taking over Syria. He clearly has taken over Syria, and he probably wants to dislodge the Kurds, whom he sees as a direct threat to Turkish control. The U.S., we have Donald Trump, who ideologically is very similar to Erdogan, and Trump wants Syrian oil. He has made a pledge to the Kurds that he's loath to break, and then there's Iraq, a U.S. colony, which has every reason to fear Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. the rebranded Al Qaeda that has taken over Syria. So there's a prospect of a broader war there. I think the HTS will lead to the Afghanization of Syria, and Syria is a country that's far more important geopolitically than Afghanistan, and I think that's disastrous. So I don't know what Trump's going to do. Is he going to sell out the Kurds? Is he going to abandon Iraq and then just stand by and watch as Al Qaeda takes over Syria? It's hard to believe. But on the other hand, he doesn't want to get embroiled in a war in the Middle East. So therefore, we don't know what kind of deal he has cooked up.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. That's just chaos. I mean, for all intents and purposes, do you think Israel's going to regret helping this group consolidate in Syria? I mean, for God's sake, it's a terrorist organization that's effectively on their border that is now ostensibly in control, or at the very least wrestling and fighting for control of state apparatus. That seems to be fraught with issues. There was in the article where they were pointing out, where they were begging Israel to get involved, to help them. They were like, "You're the strongest in the area. Everybody's afraid of you. Help us, help us." And they point out, they says, "Look, they're not going after you now, but at some point you will be a target." And Israel, with the diplomat who was reporting in that story, who was talking about it, basically acknowledged that's true. We accept that they are not coming after us now. Part of the reason we're destroying everything in Damascus and everything in the bombing campaigns, I mean, like 500 strikes or something to that effect. But they acknowledge that at some point, when the state apparatus is consolidated, Israel will become a target. Do you buy that? And if so, can they really be that comfortable with this organization on their border?
Well, I mean, I think that Israel is essentially locked in a forever war with the surrounding Middle East. I mean, Israel is comfortable with no one on its border. Even Egypt makes it nervous, and the same thing with Jordan. But certainly, Lebanon's a broken country, and Syria has been smashed. And HTS, I don't think that Israel fears anything militarily from HTS. HTS is they're nothing, and Israel's military domination of the region has never been more dramatic than it is now. I mean, it is extraordinary. I mean, in '67, the Israelis smashed the Arab nationalist movement. And in 2023, 24, they have equally as thoroughly smashed the Islamist movement. And there's just nothing left. Now, HTS, may carry on as a Turkish proxy force, but they are not remotely in a position to engage with the Israelis militarily. Listen, Hamas started a war on October 7th, 2023. Hezbollah joined in. They have now been destroyed. Israel's domination of the region has never been more overwhelming. Netanyahu is the king of the Middle East. It is quite a turnabout. So I don't think Israel is too worried about HTS, and they're quite happy to see Syria divided, weakened, devastated by these Islamist forces. I mean, it's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy for the Syrian people. And I mean, Syria itself is, this is the heart of the Middle East, culturally, politically, historically. I mean, to see it brought down in this fashion is, to me, just tragic.
Yeah, my heart goes out to the people on the ground.
Yeah.
Look, personally, I think the war, I think October 7th was a date. I think something dramatic happened on that date with a lot of people being killed, but I don't think it started on October 7th. I mean, this has been something that's been going on for a while, even though I agree with you that it was a dramatic attack that Israel used it as its casus belli in order to reshape the Middle East. I think last time we talked, I don't think I would have agreed that Israel was the dominant military power in the region, but I agree with you now. I think it goes without saying. I mean, Hezbollah has been decapitated. Hamas, or for that matter, Gaza has been isolated. The West Bank is going to get annexed. And Syria is going to be in chaos for the foreseeable future in the way that Afghanistan and Libya ended up in chaos, or for that matter, Iraq. So no, you have been more right in your analysis on this one than I will have been. Daniel, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this, honestly. Thank you. You have a good one. Daniel Lazare. He is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He has written several books, including The Velvet Coup and America's Undeclared War. You can follow Daniel on X at DH and you can find his column on weeklyworker.co.uk and many other outlets. Daniel, man, really good. Thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to keep this show ticking along. In a few minutes, we're going to get Carl Jha. He's going to come on to have a conversation about China. China is executing a business leader. Apparently, the guy embezzled, I think it was several million